It is, or it would be most unusual for any ambassador of Pakistan, past, present, or future, to be introducing an ambassador from India. But in this case, it is neither difficult nor unusual, because Ambassador Kamalesh Sharma is a truly unusual person who distinguished himself at the United Nations in a very difficult environment, because as you know, the United Nations is an institution with 189 ambassadors, so-called ambassadors, but actually sharks sitting around a table. And it takes a lot for anybody to distinguish himself as quickly and as eminently as Ambassador Sharma did. He has been here for 5 years, and during that period, he has proven himself to be much more than an ambassador. He is one of the few at the United Nations who have evidenced a versatility, not just in diplomacy, but also in art, in thought, and in writing. He's a thinker. He's a person who has authored 2 superb books, one on imagining tomorrow, and the other a book of poetry called Mille Fleurs, of poetry chosen from around the world. He is certainly the most articulate ambassador at the United Nations, a spokesman whose ideas have energized and elevated the debate in that institution. The United Nations, as you know, is a place where all of us are torn between 2 competing demands. There is a demand of furthering the foreign policy of the respective countries that we come from, and that is what we are paid for, and it has to be done. But there is also a higher calling, a higher objective of trying to build a happier, a safer, and a saner world. Ambassador Kamalesh Sharma has shown himself to be a worthy son of the United Nations, because he has been a fountain of ideas at the United Nations and an extraordinary generator of constructive and forward-looking debate. And that is why it gives me great pleasure, and in fact an honor, to introduce him to you as an ambassador, as a versatile diplomat, as a thinker, as an author, and above all, as a friend.
Dr. Esquith, Kamal, thank you very much indeed for that glowing introduction. We've been friends for so long, it's very surprising you haven't found me out as yet. But it reflects more the generosity of spirit of Kamal than anything else. It is true that ever since, in fact, most if not all of what he said applies much more appropriately to him than to me, because the figure he cut in the United Nations was extraordinary by, as everyone recognized it, by any standards. But we are friends, we say nice things about each other. The subject which was chosen by me today was a very general one, India and in the world. And I'd really like to approach it in 3 dimensions. One is just the national perspective of India, try and give to you what my thinking is, what the national achievement and failures have been. And the other is the regional one, and the third is the global perspective. And I hope to get through it as quickly as I can. As far as the national perspective is concerned, when India became independent, it was one of the largest societies in the world. And it has not stopped getting bigger. Now we are at 1 billion people. It is a subcontinent often described as such. It has a lot of variety in it. people at different levels of development, varieties of culture. And the notices which were given to the country when we became independent were not very favorable ones, because the objective conditions, as it were, appeared to people to be such that it would be very difficult to find a style and a culture and a quality of governance which was move this country forward in the way in which it was required. But the way in which Indian polity has evolved over the last half century is very interesting to watch, because it's been done very quietly. The achievements of India are not achievements which are easily perceived, except through the passage of time and an evaluation of what has happened over time. In the field of politics, which is central, because our constitution describes us as a democracy and all the appurtenances of a democracy, processes of participative governance, how they would unfold in the country was a big question mark. It wasn't clear whether there would be central parties which will govern the whole country. There are going to be smaller parties which are going to govern the states, and that's how it began. One of the big imponderables which people like me, who were students when in the 50s and the country became independent, we thought that the country was headed in the direction of large national parties who will run the nation and smaller parties of the states who will run the states. This was virtually something which was accepted as a fact, political fact in India, and things would not be otherwise. But there was a big surprise in store, because today when you say India, you see that the large national party, which is the Congress party, is commonly perceived as a party which will remain important, but will find it extremely difficult to regain the preeminence which it had in the earlier decades. And what we have in its place is a coalition governance. The current party has more than 20 participants. And although coalition governance invites its own difficulties, I would suggest to you that the gains are more than the losses. The first thing which it does is, it makes the parties from the region, who may have got a dozen votes in the parliament, it gives them a national consciousness, because when they share a coalition partnership in the center, they are forced as a regional party to think national. This is a process of education which has been quite remarkable, because it's hard to think of any party today which has not, in the last 10 years or so, been part of governance. Coalition politics has dictated that whoever can form a coalition and get the numbers right will form the government. And therefore, this culture of getting together and formation of governments has meant that the regional parties have become nationalized. And the converse has also happened. The national party has become regionalized, because unless you are sensitive to the problems of the region, it becomes extremely difficult for you to have a coalition. The second thing which it does is, if you have a variety of parties needing to form a coalition, on what is your platform? If you are a monolithic, a single party, wings within your party can propel you in any direction. Party is responsible for its own policies. But if there are many different parties from left of center, right of center, some purely with regional agendas, it propels you in the middle. It forces you to define a national policy by which you will subscribe, politically subscribe. And although we've had different colors of coalitions over the last 3 or 4 governments which we have had, this process has produced what you may call a national agenda. And this national agenda is secularism, country of all faiths, participative governance, respect for a democratic constitution, institution building, transparency in governance, rotation in governance. All of these principles have become adopted by all the parties of whatever size. So you have a gain in cross-fertilization between the regions and the center, and then you have a gain in the definition of the agenda. People who have come to power through a democratic process, then